Imagine bringing a dark secret around with you for decades and only letting it go when you were about to die. What makes someone admit to killing someone even though they have been avoiding justice for it right before they died? Over the course of human history, there have been several instances in which persons who committed murder were able to elude justice, only to confess to their crimes while they were lying on their deathbeds. It is common for people to make these late confessions out of a mixture of regret, shame, or a wish to relieve themselves of their burdens before they pass away. These kinds of disclosures not only shock the general public, but they also provoke much introspection over the nature of justice, morality, and human behavior. Through an examination of some of the most heartbreaking and illuminating examples in which individuals confessed to murders for which they had previously evaded accountability, this video provides a glimpse into the intricate relationship that exists between criminality, confession, and the passage of time. An investigation into the case of the Sleeping Killer. The case of a guy who was only known as the Sleeping Killer, a moniker that was given due to the manner of his confession, is considered to be one of the most notable examples of a confession made on another person's deathbed. In the late 1940s, Robert Wilson, a well-respected member of the community and a war veteran, was suspected of being involved in the disappearance of Emily Adams, a little girl who lived inside his neighborhood. Although a comprehensive search and investigation were conducted, there was no tangible evidence that could link Wilson to Emily's disappearance. As a result, the investigation eventually came to a halt. Wilson had what appeared to be a typical life, including getting married and having children, but he was never able to completely escape the shadow of suspicion. Finally, in 1997, when he was 78 years old and lying on his deathbed, Wilson admitted that he had committed the murder of Emily Adams. As part of his confession, he provided specific details about the crime as well as the place where Emily's bones were buried. After having a long-standing suspicion of Wilson, the authorities were able to retrieve Emily's decomposing remains from the site that he mentioned. The family of the victim was able to find closure as a result of Wilson's confession. Nevertheless, it also raised questions regarding the manner in which such a crime could go unpunished for such a long period of time. It is difficult to bring those responsible for the crime to justice when there is a lack of evidence, as demonstrated by the case of Wilson, which emphasizes the complexity of the criminal justice system. While his confession did offer some degree of closure, it also brought to light the shortcomings of the investigation process and the profound impact that unresolved cases continue to have on the lives of victims and the families of those who have been affected by them. The confession that Joseph Smith made on his deathbed. In the early 1950s, the small town of Harmony, Pennsylvania was rocked by a string of terrible killings that occurred in succession. After conducting a comprehensive investigation, the police were unable to identify a suspect, despite the fact that the killings had a profound impact on the community. There was no resolution to the case, and as time passed, the public's recollection of the murders gradually disappeared from their mind. Joseph Smith, a 76-year-old man who was suffering from terminal cancer at the time, admitted in 2003 that he was the person responsible for the murders that occurred in Harmony. The confession that Smith gave was initially given to his family and then to the authorities. In it, he provided specifics about the crimes that were consistent with the evidence that was discovered at the scene. The confessions made by Smith were supported by forensic evidence, which included DNA and fingerprints that had not been known to anybody before. Due to the fact that Smith's confession brought to light the pain of the victims and the long-lasting impact on their families, the discovery was both stunning and devastating. Additionally, the case highlighted the challenges of solving cold cases and the significance of continuing attempts to seek justice for victims even after the crimes have been committed for a considerable amount of time, or even decades. The biblical account of Confession of the Prodigal Son. The Confession of the Prodigal Son is a case that received a large amount of attention from the media due to the dramatic nature of the confession included within it. The body of a wealthy businessman named Harold Jenkins was discovered in the 1970s, and the circumstances surrounding his death were suspicious. The investigation that was being conducted at the time was unable to determine the cause of death or identify a suspect, which resulted in the case being categorized as an unsolved homicide. In the year 1990, David Jenkins, who had been alienated from his father, came forth with a confession as he was lying on his side. David, a problematic individual who had become estranged from his family and had been living a turbulent life, confesses to killing his father following a violent argument that was caused by disagreements around finances. During his confession, he provided specific information about the murder that were consistent with the evidence found at the scene of the crime. The circumstances surrounding the unrepentant killer, both the terrifying nature of the confession and the lengthy time of evasion that occurred in the unrepentant killer case, are important aspects of the case. Authorities and members of the community were left in a condition of terror and confusion as a result of a number of murders that occurred in the Chicago area throughout the 1980s that were not solved. All of the victims were young ladies, and despite the fact that law enforcement made a significant amount of attempts, they were unable to identify any suspects. As a result of Reynolds' confession, the families of the victims were able to find closure, and the doubts that had been raised regarding the killings were finally resolved. The case highlighted the complexities of criminal psychology and the manner in which persons might elude justice for years, only to expose their misdeeds in their deathbed moments. This case also highlighted the complicated nature of criminal psychology. In addition to this, it brought to light the difficulties that law enforcement agencies encounter when attempting to solve cases with insufficient evidence, as well as the emotional impact that unresolved cases have on the families of victims. Some thoughts on confessions made on the deathbed. Confessions made on the deathbed serve as a potent reminder of the lingering impact of crimes that have not been resolved and the intricate relationship that exists between guilt, regret, and justice. These confessions frequently occur at a time when the offenders are confronting their own mortality, and they have the potential to bring a feeling of closure for the families of the victims as well as a way for the culprits to make their ultimate reckoning. The situations that are covered in this article shed light on the difficulties that law enforcement and the criminal justice system encounter when attempting to deal with cold cases and the psychological impact that is caused by crimes that have not been solved. Furthermore, they highlight the significance of continuing to make efforts to seek justice for victims even after the crimes have been perpetrated for a considerable amount of time. The complex and frequently uncomfortable nature of criminal behavior and the pursuit of justice is brought to light by the occurrence of confessions made on behalf of the deceased. Despite the fact that these confessions bring closure and answers to a great number of people, they also bring to light the constraints and difficulties that are inherent in the criminal justice system. A sobering reflection on the nature of guilt, the consequences of illegal deeds, and the continued search for justice in the face of unanswered mysteries may be found in the accounts of those individuals who confessed to their crimes when they were on their deathbeds. If you were intrigued by these haunting deathbed confessions, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Don't miss out on more gripping stories and deep dives into the most shocking true crime cases. Your support helps us bring more fascinating content to light.